Callene and Eric have been dear friends for years through the Conservancy, and they own the Rare Hair Barn in Kansas, and it's the largest breed meat rabbit enterprise in the United States. They have a large herd of heritage breed Piney Woods cattle and work with the critically endangered Palmer Dun strain. Callene has worked with cattle breeds, and she also works with the Sedgwick County Zoo in Kansas. Eric has done everything on the farm, off the farm, and they continue to support each other. They're active members of the Livestock Conservancy. Callene used to be the chairman of the board of the Conservancy. That's how we met. She contributes regularly to Brit magazine, and I am honored to call them friends. So we were just remarking and chatting about some adventures that we had together. And I'm gonna let them take because they've got a lot to discuss. So thank you all, and here we go.
All right, well, thank you, Carrie. I hope we live up to your introduction. We're gonna just talk a little bit about heritage breeds of livestock because heritage breeds really belong in regenerative agriculture programs. And so I'm hoping that we can maybe talk a little bit about some of the different breeds, their history, and just introduce you to some breeds you may not be familiar with. We'll talk mostly about cattle and goats because those are going to be typically the main species that people are going to start with. But between Eric and I, we've worked with just about every major species of livestock. So if there are any questions or something you'd like to discuss, we'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss anything like that at the end. Okay, Rare Hair Barn, like Carrie mentioned, the Rare Hair Barn was our meat rabbit business.
Excuse me, I don't want to cut you off, but if you'd like to share your screen, you can feel free to go ahead and do that again with your presentation.
Did I not?
It's at the, if you just want to hover over that green button at the bottom.
Okay, how about now? Better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, I apologize, folks. This is actually the first Zoom presentation like this I've ever done. I managed to survive the pandemic without having to do this, so I guess it was time to take my turn. Anyway, Rare Hair Barn. I guess actually let me back up a little bit and I'll kind of tell you the story of how we got into heritage breeds. We met when we both worked at a confinement hog operation. And with all the stuff that entails, and it didn't take us too long to figure out that really wasn't how we wanted to make our living or our life. And so we moved from northern Missouri down to Wichita. And I was there with my degree in animal science. It was obvious I wasn't cut out to work with big ag. And so what was I going to do with my life? And I wound up applying at the Sedgwick County Zoo and just thinking, okay, there's got to be some way I can use these skills. Well, it turned out they had a position open in the area called Children's Farms. And so I thought, well, that'll be all right. I'm not super into children, but it's a job and, we'll see where it goes in the zoo. When I went for my interview, I was 2 hours early because that's just how I roll. And so while I was waiting, the keepers there at the zoo gave me a clipping of a magazine article. And it was a Smithsonian article written by a man named Berlin Klinkenborg. And it was about rare breeds of livestock. And I had a degree in animal science, and I had never heard of some of these breeds. And it just floored me to find out that there were some of these breeds that were so endangered. I remember one of the breeds they discussed in that article was the Cleveland Bay. And at the time of the Cleveland Bay horse, sorry. And at the time of the writing of this article, there were only 25 of them in the country. And the article wrapped up celebrating the birth of the 26th. So that was where I guess I first drank the Heritage Rare Breeds Kool-Aid, and it's been a love affair ever since. So with that focus on heritage breeds, when we started the Rare Hair Barn, we wanted to work with the endangered breeds of rabbit. And these were some breeds that Eric's grandpa had actually raised when Eric was young. So from there, it kind of snowballed. Not only did I work with a lot of heritage breeds at the zoo, which has the largest collection of heritage breeds of any zoo in the country, but then of course they just started creeping onto the farm. We wound up with a herd of Piney Woods cattle, and even though I swore we'd never have goats, we now have a herd of Arapawa goats. So that's just kind of how we wound up getting into heritage breeds, and it's really been a love affair for both of us. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about domestic livestock. We have been, as humans as a species, have been fascinated for a long time with certain species of animals. We drew cave paintings and were fascinated by them for a long, long time. Okay, agriculture, as we know it, is really just kind of a blip on the radar of human history. I don't know if you can see that little piece of pie clearly, but the big red and blue disc is the sum total of human history, and the years of agriculture are just that tiny little slice down there. And you can argue agriculture good or bad. I think there's definitely, a lot of things about modern agriculture that we can disagree with. But I'm hoping that conferences like this one and the interest in regenerative agriculture are kind of leading us towards the next phase of agriculture. It's changed drastically from historic agriculture, what our grandparents and great-grandparents did, to what agriculture is today. And so I'm really hoping that we're kind of starting to see a shift in taking things back to a much more sustainable level, because we really, really do need to get back there. Okay, it's always fascinated me how domestication and things occurred. There were several things that had to take place in human culture for domesticating animals to start taking place. One of them is humans had to have a social structure to promote cooperation. When you are trying to tame a wild animal, it helps to have people that will not throw you under the bus, so to speak, when you're doing that. There had to be certain knowledges of cultivation techniques, especially with crops, and specialization with particular plant and animal foods. Cultivation versus domestication, applying both to crops and animals. Domestication is modifying a plant or animal to be different than its wild ancestors, whether it's conscious or unconscious human effort, making actual selective choices to change an animal or plant is domestication. Cultivation is basically just sowing seeds or managing animals which don't really differ much from their wild population. There are several areas of the world where domestications of both plants and animals took place. Even as far-flung as some of these areas are, a lot of these domestications took place at roughly the same amount of time. Most of the species of livestock and animals that we are most familiar with were domesticated in the Near East near the Fertile Crescent, but there were several other areas where domestication of different species took place. Like in the South Central Andes, llamas, guanacos, alpacas were all kind of being domesticated at about the same time. Okay, why begin farming? It was a lot easier to feed a population from the same amount of land around a settlement. Man had to reach a certain level of socialization, which has only been possible in the last few thousand years. And it was also made possible by the accumulated experience of thousands of generations of hunter-gatherers. We had to know which plants were good and safe and good to eat before we could even begin to attempt trying to domesticate them. Animal domestication brought a lot of benefits. First of which was transport. It was much easier to pack up and move all your things if you had a ox or a goat to help move it. Draft power, plowing, and things like that was made much easier with draft animals. Of course, food, but then there are several other benefits of animal domestication, like wool, hides, manure, and everything like that, that are also benefits of being able to work closely with certain species of animals. Domestic animals all share certain characteristics. Whoa, sorry about that. They are hardy, flexible, and they are generalist in their feeding habits. If you think about a species such as the koala, they live strictly on eucalyptus leaves, and when something happens to that habitat, it makes it very difficult then for them to be able to adapt. Domestic animals are able to eat a variety of plants and can adapt to many different feeding habits. Yeah, I'm really sorry if y'all can hear that noise. I did not know it was going to do that, but at least y'all are awake now, right? Domestic animals are all able to tolerate or like humans better than some species, some exotic species, which is definitely helpful. Domestic animals like comfort. They would rather lay around and eat than go out and, you know, have to really hunt for food. So they definitely appreciate the ease and comfort of being cared for by humans. Domestic animals are also useful. That is part of the relationship that we have with domestic animals, is they provide things for our benefit in exchange for us caring for them. And they also aren't picky about their breeding partners. One of the things that I've learned through working at the zoo and hearing some of the discussions about trying to get endangered species of certain animals to breed is that they are extremely picky about their mates. And while the program and all the data may say that this animal is going to be great mated to this animal, they may not like each other and won't breed, and so it's much more challenging. Domestic animals will pretty much breed with whatever females you present them. They're just not super picky. And they also have gregarious social groups, which means that they all thrive in a herd structure, and they enjoy being with their herd mates and thrive with the social interaction. I'm super sorry, people. The effects of being able to domesticate animals includes increased carrying capacity of the land. We're able to get more from our domestic animals on less acres if it's managed well. One of the other effects of domestication was development of sedentary societies. And again, we could argue whether or not that's good or bad, but domesticating animals did lead to the civilization that we are enjoying today. Changes in social structure from cities and humans living in closer contact with one another, and the ability to specialize in certain crafts. Without domestic animals, there would have been no need for people to learn to weave wool or tan hides or butcher beef or do any of the other specialized skills that we have today. And domesticating animals really led to modern civilization. Animals have been domesticated for more than 10,000 years. The first animal domesticated was the dog. But then after that, as far as the animals we're interested about for this program, sheep were the first, goats a close second, pigs and cattle after that, and then horses are really one of the most recent domestications. But they also were probably one of the most revolutionary, because domesticating the horse, of course, gave us the ability to ride, move farther over more territory, and none of that would have been possible without the horse. Sheep and goats were domesticated in that Fertile Crescent area of the Near East, and they were the first domesticated animals because of their flocking instinct. Sheep and goats like to flock together, and so that made them easier to herd and to corral. They provided fiber, meat, and milk, and they also fit with the more nomadic lifestyle of the time. It was relatively easy to let your herd graze, and then when you were ready to move on, you just herded them off and set up camp somewhere else. Cattle, again, were also domesticated in that same geographic area, and they provided draft power, so people were able to begin plowing and planting, and they provided meat, milk, and hides. Milk, they've recently found in very old pottery fragments traces of milk, so we know that people were drinking cow's milk many, many years ago, even often before we thought that they might have. And that, since they were able to, people were able to develop and plant crops, that enabled a more stationary existence. Swine, domesticated about 6,000 years ago, largely for food products, but swine were actually the first recycling bin, if you want to call it that. They could thrive off of scraps and things that weren't always as edible for humans. They weren't picky, and they could thrive on what humans threw away. Chickens were domesticated in Southeast Asia. They provided meat, eggs, and feathers, and they were great because they required very little input. They could go out and scratch and gather most of their own food without too much input from humans. And then, of course, the horse provided us with transportation, mobility, and weapons. There are several other species that are considered domesticated: camels, silk moths, elephants, honeybees, rabbits, yak, water buffalo, llama, and alpaca are all also considered domestic animals, but they have not become as globalized as the other species, the primary domestic animals. It's always fascinated me how just a handful of species out of the entire range of different animal species that are available in the world, how just a handful are ones that were domesticated. There's a really interesting book called Covenant of the Wild, and in it, the writer kind of makes the argument that this was kind of an evolutionary choice for some of these species, not choice as in, you know, conscious, oh, I think I'm going to go over here and go into this corral and be domesticated. But if you think of evolution as the genes adapting to circumstances in order to keep surviving, then it kind of does make sense that with the traits that some of these animals had, that it worked out to be a good evolutionary choice to partner with humans. Okay, here's a fun fact. Turkeys are the only species of livestock that are native to North America. Turkeys were domesticated actually by the indigenous people in the Americas before colonial exploration. They think about 2,000 years ago, turkeys had been domesticated by the Aztecs in Mexico and the Mayans in Central America. In the early 1500s, the Spanish explorers found both wild and domesticated turkeys on their visits to the New World. The turkey then went back to Spain, and several developed varieties were developed in Spain, and then by 1600, turkeys were pretty common throughout Europe, and then some of these varieties were actually reintroduced to the Americas with colonists, when the colonists colonized. Okay, I think we all know the pros and cons of industrial agriculture, so I won't go too much into those. I think we're all here because we're more interested in the benefits of a sustainable agriculture. Agriculture has changed a lot in a relatively short amount of time. In 1776, over 90% of the American people were farmers. In 1950, approximately 40 to 50% of people still lived on the farm. But in 2001, that's just 20 years ago, less than 2% of the American people were farmers. So that's in a very, very short amount of time, we've had a really fundamental shift in agriculture. Okay, factory farms make use of industrial stock rather than pure breeds of livestock. They rely on confinement housing, feedlots, and all of that serves to reduce opportunities for natural behavior, such as the ability to forage, make a nest, and maternal ability. Corn is, of course, one of the primary industrial crops. And 80% of corn goes for livestock feed and high fructose corn syrup. The average American consumed 73 pounds of corn syrup in 2000. So it's everywhere. Turkey production, of the 270 million broad-breasted turkeys raised each year, 42 are controlled by just 4 producers. And again, those are industrial stocks that are really short-lived and don't really have very good lives. Okay, in the beef market, 80% of the beef market is controlled by just 4 producers. Of those 4, 3 of them are also pork producers that control about 57% of that market as well. So it's very tightly controlled. Okay. Are there any questions? I saw there's a couple of notes in the chat. Are there any questions that we should address before we go on to heritage breeds? Okay, heritage breeds. That's where the fun is. The definition of heritage breeds. The Livestock Conservancy has worked to get a definition of what a true heritage breeds is for several of the species that they work with. These are considered traditional breeds that your grandparents may have had on their farm. They're adapted to local environments, and they retain a lot of the natural abilities, foraging ability, fertility, maternal instinct, and resistance to disease and parasites that a lot of industrial or confinement breeds don't share. One way, a good way to think about heritage breeds is that they are more well-rounded, so to speak. An industrial breed or a animal that thrives in a confinement operation, thrives probably not really the right word, they tend to have been selected for just one trait, which is usually fast growth or high production at the expense of the rest of the genetic package. And you can't select for one trait at the expense of everything else without then starting to see problems start to crop up. Heritage breeds tend to be more well-rounded. They are selected. If you are, say, just for an example, selecting in your own herd of cattle, you're going to pick traits that you like. If you like a certain color or a certain size or something like that, you're going to select for those traits, but you're selecting the entire genetic package. You're just not pulling one trait out at the expense of everything else. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Livestock Conservancy, or it used to be known as the American Minor Breeds Conservancy. This organization was founded in 1977, and they were founded because in looking for certain animals to fill a role in a living history farm, to be as true to that time period as possible, they were not able to find the animals that they needed to fill that role. And it had only been probably 50 or 75 years since that particular breed was commonly found. So a group of people started discussion about, where had they gone? Why can't we find them? And so that was the foundation for the American Minor Breeds Conservancy. So this group was founded in 1977, and the first group to actually take a look at how many breeds of livestock might have been lost just in a short amount of time. And there have been breeds of livestock that had gone extinct before the founding of the Minor Breeds Conservancy. But fortunately, since their founding, there have been no other breeds of livestock that have gone extinct. So that's pretty good news. They also established clear criteria for conservation of rare breeds of livestock and parameters for defining what is actually rare and endangered. You could for example, several years ago, I saw an ad for this miniature Panda Cattle that this guy had tried to create, and they were very small dwarf cattle, but had, you know, panda black ears, muzzle, and so they were really, really cute. But they wouldn't have been, even though there were very few of them, they would not have been considered a rare breed because they aren't actually a breed. They're just something some guy created. So the Livestock Conservancy then established clear criteria for conservation and defining what's actually rare and endangered when it comes to livestock. Their name was changed in 1993 to the American Livestock Breeds Conservancy, partly to kind of get away from the use of the word minor, which could be interpreted to mean not as good or less than. So they changed their name then, and they recently, a few years ago, are now known as just Livestock Conservancy. Name change, but the same passion for conservation of livestock is still with them. Okay, conservation of livestock breeds historically has been in the hands of millions of people worldwide, which is truly where they belong. Today, so many people don't even understand agriculture. They literally think their food comes from the grocery store. And only a few people had kept rare breeds. Fortunately, they did. Rare breeds are hardy, and the people that tend to keep rare breeds are a little on the stubborn side. So they were basically just too hard-headed to give up the breeds that they knew worked for them. The need for diversity is never ending, and therefore our efforts to preserve this diversity can never cease. This is from a really wonderful book called Shattering by Carrie Fowler, and it highlights a lot of how badly we need diversity in agriculture, or else we are not able to respond to changing needs. Okay, what is a breed? I've talked a lot about breeds, but how do we actually define a breed? Okay, one of the best definitions of a breed is to consider them a group of individuals with a uniform appearance and behavior that distinguishes them from other groups within the same species. And when mated together, members of a breed reproduce the same type. So we can always tell a group of Black Angus cattle from a group of Hereford cattle. They look different from one another, and when you breed two Angus cattle together, you are going to get an Angus, a black cow. The same with a Hereford. They are red with white faces. You breed pure Herefords together, you're going to continue to get red cows with white faces. If you breed a Hereford and an Angus together, you get the first generation is going to be black cows with white faces because they have gotten genes from both parents. In the cattle world, those are commonly called black white face or black baldy. And while you will consistently get the black white face cattle from a Hereford Angus cross, if you breed two black white face cattle together, there's no telling what you're going to get. You might get solid, you might get red, you might get white face, you might get all sorts of other stuff. So the black white face, even though they all have that distinct appearance, when mated together, they do not consistently reproduce that same type. So that is probably one of the best definitions of a breed I've ever run across. Okay, how did breeds develop? Some breeds developed by natural selection, just by becoming a closed population and adapting to a certain environment. Environmental selection played a large part. There are very many differences in breeds that are adapted to cold climates as there are as breeds that are adapted to warm climates. The environment can play a really heavy role on the traits that certain breeds develop. And also human selection. Selecting for certain behaviors, physical appearance, production traits, and so on. Okay, there are 4 basic types of breeds as far as what the Livestock Conservancy considers breeds. The standardized breed is the one most people are going to think of when they think of a breed. They're usually a clearly defined type. They have, most of the time, a breed organization that takes members and generally performs registration services and verifies pedigrees and progeny testing. And these are going to be the most uniform of type. They're generally going to have the most consistent physical appearance. Like the picture of the sheep, those are Tunis sheep, and they will consistently always have those red faces and that ivory colored wool. Landrace is another type of breed. These are generally a little more loosely defined. They can be different colors within the breed. They can have, different horn shapes, different patterns, things like that. But they are all pretty well recognizable as members of that breed. Land races have developed more from environmental selection and human selection. For example, the Piney Woods cattle, while there is an association and a registry, they tend to lean more towards the landrace category. And that's a Piney Woods cow down there in the bottom picture, because they have a lot more variability in appearance. And they have been more shaped by the environment than actual human selection. So again, there's still a breed and there can be an association, but they don't always have that same uniform appearance. Feral breeds are animals that have escaped human management and returned to a wild state. They're often just kind of a hodgepodge of genes rather than, a certain type. Probably one of the most recognizable breeds is the American Mustang. They are descended from domesticated horses that escaped, were let loose, and basically returned to their semi-wild state. There have been many different breeds and types of horses that have contributed to the makeup of the American Mustang. Another example is the Ossabaw Island hog, a critically rare breed that descended from hogs that escaped human management, wound up on an island on the East Coast, and basically just returned to their feral roots. Industrial stocks are not really breeds. They're often crossbred strains that are used in intensive confinement production. These animals are selected for 1 or 2 production traits at the expense of all the others. And they I don't want to say rely on because I don't think it's their choice, obviously, but they are in intensive, highly input driven production systems. And they are generally, most of these are closely guarded secrets of the companies that, the seed stock companies. They're very proprietary. They don't want to let people know what breeds went into their industrial strains, so they can try to retain a competitive advantage over their competition. Okay, the Livestock Conservancy every year publishes a conservation priority list. And every year they look at registration data from the breed associations that work with the particular breeds. And every year they look at those numbers to see where the breed needs to be placed. Does it need more help? Does it need less help? For a species, or well, for a breed to be on the Livestock Conservancy conservation priority list, it needs to belong to one of the 6 major traditional livestock species. So cattle, chickens, turkeys, goats, horses. Needs to be a true genetic breed in the sense that it will replicate true to type. It needs to have had an established and continuously breeding population since 1925. And the reason for needing that continuously breeding population is if a breed becomes extinct, even if you recreate it, it's never the same genetics. So it needs to have had, even if it's become a critically rare number, it needs to have had at least some animals in a continuously breeding population since 1925. And there needs to be certain numerical requirements to be on that list. Critically endangered, and they divide mammal and poultry. Critically endangered breeds are ones that have fewer than 200 annual registrations a year and fewer than 2,000 global population. That's not a lot of animals. The exotic animal zoo world will have a stroke at a population getting down to 200 animals, but there are several breeds that is their state. And many of these breeds have populations that number fewer than 200 total. One of the breeds that we work with, the Arapawa goat, there are probably less than 500 of them in the world, and that's counting the population here in the United States and also in New Zealand. Threatened, fewer than 1,000 annual registrations, fewer than 5,000 global population. The watch category, these are ones that have fewer than 2,500 annual registrations, fewer than 10,000 global population. And there are also breeds that they may be concerned about because they have a limited geographic distribution. For example, if you have a breed and it has a herd on the West Coast and on the East Coast, but not much in between, it's very difficult for those 2 herds or 2 groups to work together and share genetics because geography really kind of gets in the way. And the study category, these are breeds that are of genetic interest but lack definition or lack genetic or historic documentation. Doesn't mean they're not rare, doesn't mean they're not worthy of conservation, but it just means that they need to know more before they know where they fall. And then the recovering category, These are breeds that were at one time listed in one of the other categories, but because of good conservation breeding, they have moved up to the point where their population is much more secure. And the cattle in this picture is a Scotch Highland. The Scotch Highland or the Highland cattle are ones that recently graduated off the conservation priority list and are no longer considered endangered. So that's one of the success stories for livestock breeding. So there are 83 mammal breeds on that conservation priority list, 30 of which are critical, and of those 83, 33 are unique to North America. I mean, they're not found anywhere else in the world. Poultry species come from one of the 4 traditional poultry species, geese, chickens, ducks, and turkeys. And bantam chickens, which a bantam, to be a true bantam, a breed of chicken can't have a large fowl counterpart. That means you can't have a big buff cochin and a bantam buff coach, and that bantam can't be listed. And again, they also have to fit the true genetic definition of breed and have a continuously established breeding population since 1925. Poultry species, critical, fewer than 500 breeding birds and 5 or fewer primary breeding flocks. Again, that's that just having a couple of people holding these genetics. There needs to be more people with flocks for them to be truly secure. Threatened, fewer than 1,000, 7 or fewer primary breeding flocks. Watch, fewer than 5,000, 10 or fewer primary breeding flocks. And again, also includes breeds that have limited geographic distribution. And study, again, they're interested in them, but they need more information. And also recovering. There are 89 poultry breeds on that conservation priority list, and 38 are critical, 27 of which are unique to North America. And it's not just a United States or a North American problem. 30% of breeds of domestic animals are endangered worldwide. So it's a global problem. Okay, real quick through the laws of genetic conservation. And I think some of these will just be common sense and pretty intuitive to this group of people. Agricultural diversity can only be safeguarded with using diverse strategies. The more people we can have coming up with new ideas and new ways to use livestock and conserve them, the better. And again, what agricultural diversity is saved depends on who is consulted. We need to make sure that everybody gets a seat at the table and a voice in deciding what diversity and what agriculture goodness needs to be saved. And agricultural diversity cannot be saved unless it is used. It is not the goal of the Livestock Conservancy or heritage breeds and people who are interested in conservation to just keep museum pieces. The agricultural diversity needs to be used. It needs to be used in its utilitarian context. Okay, would this be a good time to stop and see if there's any questions, or should I just truck on?
If anyone wants to put some questions in the chat, feel free to do so. I don't see any right now, but
Okay.
guys, definitely put your questions in the chat. Again, there's a chat bubble at the bottom. You can just click that and type whatever you'd like to ask Callene and Eric.
Yes, please. I This feels a little awkward to me. I'm used to having audience participation, so I'd love to take a few questions. We'll go on and talk a little bit about adding cows to the farm and some of the husbandry and management things that need to be considered before you bring cows to your farm. First thing is cattle are ruminants. The rumen is the first part of the digestive system, and it's basically a huge fermentation vat. When cattle eat, they chew their food and it goes through their digestive system into the rumen, where it gets mixed into a slurry, and there are literally trillions upon trillions of bacteria in that rumen that then break down what the cow ate and turn it into fatty acids and things that the cow can then use to nourish itself or provide energy. So for a ruminant, which ruminants are cattle, sheep, goats, they depend on a high forage diet for their health. It does not do them good at all to be put on a high grain diet like a feedlot cow is often put on. Cattle, sheep, and goats evolved to eat grass and browse. That is what their system was developed for, and that's what they need. Okay, benefits of cows on the farm. Meat and milk, of course. Nothing tastes as good as your own homegrown heritage beef. Milk, we were able for the first time this spring to milk one of our Piney Woods cows and made some butter and cheese for the first time. And let me tell you, that butter was extraordinary. It was the yellowest butter that anybody has ever seen, and it was just so good. I can't wait for calving season next year. If you do make cheese and things like that, skim milk and milk that is left over from these processes can also be used as a supplemental feed for chickens or hogs. Okay, this is a question Eric always asks me. We've been married nearly 30 years, and he constantly asks me what my plan is, and he still hasn't quite got comfortable with me saying, well, we'll figure it out when we get there. So before you add cattle or any species of livestock to your farm, you need to kind of figure out what your goals are. Is your goal to have milk? If so, a cow has to have a calf to produce milk. And all right, I'm sorry, my slides are trying to hurry me. A mammal has to have a baby to produce milk. And I don't know how many times I have had this conversation at the zoo with women who have infants with them that are just shocked that we cannot just go milk a cow for the milking demo. They don't understand why, well, we don't have any calves is the reason, and it's revolutionary to them that cows have to have a calf to produce milk. If you're gonna raise beef, you need to decide if you want to raise your own calf or purchase a bottle calf. How are you going to get your cows? Are you going to breed your own breeding stock or purchase them? And if you purchase them, how are you going to get them there? A lot of times people don't stop to consider that, you know, getting them is just the first step. You're going to need to transport them to your farm. If you're going to be processing beef, you've got to get them to the processor. So how are you going to plan to handle that? How many cows are you going to get? how much pasture do you have? Your stocking intensity can vary a lot from climate to climate and grass type to grass type. It can even vary dramatically from season to season. We all know that climate is getting a little more unstable. You can go from drought to monsoon in a short amount of time. And so all those are going to affect how many cows you're able to put on your pasture. What do you need to start with your cows? Cattle are pretty hardy. They don't need a whole lot in the way of elaborate barns and buildings. They need shade depending on the climate. A good shade tree might work, or they might need a run-in shelter. Space requirements. There's a lot of different factors that can affect how many cows you can put per acre. The picture on the left with the Highland cows, that looks like it's in a much more arid, more brittle climate. So you're not going to be able to put as many animals per acre there as you would in the picture on the right, the Randall lineback. That looks like a much more lush climate. Probably got a completely different growing season and rainfall. So you're going to probably be able to put more cattle on that pasture than you would the drier, more brittle pasture. Cattle need access to feed and water. A cow can drink up to 20 gallons of water a day, depending on if she is lactating or if it's hot. So they can drink quite a bit of water. Every geographic region of the country is going to have different mineral content in the soil. You may have an overabundance in some minerals and be short in others. So find out what your soil is deficient in, and that's going to be likely what your grass is going to be deficient in. And so then once you know that, you can add a mineral supplement if necessary. Cattle also enjoy a little treat of grain or something like that, which gets them to come up and allows you to inspect them and see how they're doing. Look for any health problems or anything like that. Pasture management. I do firmly believe that cattle belong on grass. That's the way we raise our piney woods. But grass-fed doesn't mean hands off. To manage your pasture well and to not overgraze it and actually have it be regenerative, you're going to need to manage it, whether it's through rotational grazing, pulling them off for a certain amount of time to let the grass recover. There are all sorts of pasture rotation systems and grazing plans. It's just only limited by your own creativity, but you will have to make sure you are taking care of your pasture so it can take care of your cows. Choosing breeds that fit your farm. Consider your own needs and your own experience, climate, landscape, temperament, and does the breed really appeal to you? I fell in love with the piney woods, and fortunately they're a breed that does well in our climate. So I didn't have to either fall in love with another breed or try to figure out how to retrofit our farm for them. These cattle in Florida, these are belted Galloway. And belted Galloway are a very hardy Scottish breed. developed in the Scottish Highlands. They have an extra thick coat and excuse me, are very cold tolerant. These cattle are in Florida and they are hot. They're in that pond cooling off, which is good, but it also means that they are not out grazing and gaining weight or being cows. So make sure when you choose a breed, you're choosing one that works for your environment. Temperament. Life is too short to work with cranky or dangerous animals. That is one of the things I have always loved about the rare and heritage breeds, is that they do tend to have a better temperament. And I think that is because they were developed in systems where they worked or were with humans up close. You know, you worked with them, you shared space with them, and the cranky, crazy, crabby ones were the ones that were Sunday dinner. So they inadvertently really selected for animals that do tend to overall have good temperaments, but that's important. They're big animals, they can be dangerous, so life's too short to work with cranky cows. Few things to consider before you buy. I think we kind of talked about that also. Advantages of buying directly from breeders is you can get to know the animals. If you buy from a small breeder, they're going to know their animals. A good responsible breeder will be honest to you about the good points and bad points of their particular animals, and they are not going to want to set you up to fail. They care about their animals, and so they want to see you succeed with them. And they can also answer, you know, any questions or anything like that down the road. And this is actually Eric, a few years ago. He's a little grayer now, but he is in our herd petting our bull. So I've always appreciated the good disposition of the bull we were able to start with. That's very important. So ask yourself some tough questions going into it. What are your skills? If you've never had cattle before, you need to be honest with yourself about your ability to handle them. Your goals, lifestyle, time assessment. Cattle are relatively low maintenance, but they do take time. And if you're someone who travels a lot or is gone a lot, you really need to be honest with yourself as far as how much time you can put into it. There's a lot of different resources that you can research to get tips and advice. Your local extension agent, Livestock Conservancy, all have a lot of information to kind of help you make your decision. So I will go quickly through some of these heritage beef breeds. These are just a few of the heritage and rare breeds that are available for people to work with. These breeds do real well in regenerative agriculture systems because they do still have a lot of the natural abilities that have been bred out of a lot of the more industrial stocks. So Red Devon is a breed that is generally a very docile animal. They make great oxen, very hardy and efficient, and do well on grass-based production systems. Galloway and belted Galloway. Again, this is a breed that was developed in the Scottish Highlands. You can really see the long, shaggy hair coat. They do very well in cold, wet climates. We had one at the zoo several years ago, and she would be outside just laying, and it'd be snowing. She'd have icicles on her ears, and she didn't care. She was comfortable. They are excellent beef animals, and the ones that I have known have all had really, really good dispositions. They're a naturally polled breed, which means without horns. So that is also an added safety factor. And if you're not super experienced working with cattle, they might be a good breed for you to look at. Highland, again, a very shaggy, picturesque breed. It's really hard not to fall in love with their little fuzzy-faced calves. They're a horned breed, but they're also generally relatively docile and good moms and do real well in pasture-based systems. Red Poll are again a good novice breed. These cattle are really, really good milkers. I don't know if you can see the udder on this mama cow, but she is producing a tremendous amount of milk. So her calf is going to grow well and have a real good advantage. They're also known to be really, really docile as well. Texas Longhorn. This is a breed that's been recently added to the Livestock Conservancy's priority list, but it is not the typical Texas Longhorn that you might think of with the, that's bred to have the really extraordinary long horns. This is a particular strain of Texas Longhorn that has not had outside blood introduced into it. So it's a very certain strain of Longhorn. But again, these are very hardy. They're much more suited to a warm climate. They're long-lived. Some of these old type Texas Longhorns can be calving well into their teens. And they're very, very, very hardy, good moms. Ancient White Park. These are beautiful cattle. When it says advanced experience, that's the truth. These are not cows for beginners. They're very smart. They tend to have a more, kind of a feral behavior to them. They're good beef cattle, very athletic, but they're not a starter cow. Lincoln Red are another really good breed. They get a little bit larger than some of the other breeds, but they grow well and are really well behaved and hardy. Dexters are a breed that have really found a niche with small farms and homesteaders. They're smaller size. They're very efficient. They produce a really tremendous amount of milk for the size of the cow. They're really considered probably one of the ideal family cows. And the nice thing about a smaller cow is that they are much more efficient and they are easier on your pasture and hay bill and resources. Milking Devon. These are a really, really beautiful breed. They have that beautiful cherry color. These are one of the breeds that was the inspiration for starting the Livestock Conservancy. They make wonderful oxen, and there is still a strong ox tradition in New England, and Milking Devon are one of the premier breeds for oxen. They're not aggressive. They're very smart and they're very alert, and it's pretty hard to fool them. They're just very clever cows. Milking Shorthorn, again, there are the Shorthorn is a pretty numerous breed, but the conservation interest is this native Milking Shorthorn, which is again a group of this breed that have not been improved by adding outside blood. So they're really good milkers, and they produce really good beef, and they also make excellent oxen as well. Pretty gentle, good beginner breed. Piney Woods and Florida Cracker are cousins to the Texas Longhorn. All three of the breeds, the Texas Longhorn, the Florida Cracker, and the Piney Woods, all descended from the same Spanish cattle that were brought over in the early 1500s. And as they spread out through the United States, they became somewhat geographically isolated and basically formed separate breeds based on their geography, but they are all basically cousins. Very heat tolerant cattle, parasite resistant. If you were a piney woods living in the pine forest swamp area, no one came around with dewormer. So if you could not resist parasites, you didn't get to pass your genes down to the next generation. They do real well in the heat and they can survive on marginal forage. That doesn't mean that you can just feed them marginal forage and expect them to thrive. But they can get along very well. Randall or Randall Lineback is another breed that is primarily found in New England and used for oxen. They're a breed that's considered a triple purpose breed. They're good for beef, milk, and draft power. Okay, I'm going to switch species for a minute. I think I'm kind of running short on time, so I want to kind of get through this so I can answer any questions. So I'm going to kind of switch to goats rather abruptly. Goats are also in the Bovidae family. They're the oldest domestic species after the dog, and most of the time both males and females have horns. Goats have a horizontal pupil, which gives them an extremely wide range of vision. They can see almost entirely 360 degrees around them, and if you've ever tried to sneak up on a goat, you know it's pretty difficult. There are several breeds of goat and sheep that kind of look similar. I mean, it's hard to tell if they're a goat or a sheep, but one way you can usually tell if an animal is a goat or a sheep is that a sheep's tail will generally point down and a goat's tail will point up, especially if the goat is feeling well. So if you ever question whether it's a goat or a sheep, look at the tail. Again, they were domesticated from a wild species of goat. Goats are extremely adaptable. They have one of the widest ecological range of any domesticated species. They're literally found everywhere, and they can thrive generally everywhere. They are more browsers than grazers. Their system is just, even though they are ruminants, their system is just a little bit different. And they really thrive on being able to browse trees, twigs, weeds. A goat's happy if it doesn't have to ever put its head down to eat. They're much more happy looking up or climbing, leaning up against trees. They have a reputation for eating almost anything, which is kind of true, but not. They can eat weeds and forage that most other animals will not. Goats can also eat poison ivy and not suffer any ill effects from it. And they really like a lot of fiber in their diet. I mean, part of their reputation for eating anything, they love to nibble on paper and things like that, but that is because they just really crave fiber in their diet, and paper works for them sometimes. So don't ever turn your back on your notebook with a goat. Again, they provide a lot of products and are a pretty pretty universal species. More goat's milk is consumed in the world than cow's milk. It's easily digestible. It has smaller fat globules, which are more readily able to be digested and pass through the gut membranes. It's basically milk that's considered kind of naturally homogenized. When you homogenize milk, it's basically a process of forcing it through a screen to break up the fat particles so that they're smaller and more easily digested. When you see your homogenized cow's milk at the grocery store, because of the small fat globules in goat's milk, you don't have to do that process with it. So it's considered naturally homogenized. Goat behavior. They're very curious, intelligent, independent, creative. Goats are kind of like cats in the fact that anything that they can get their head through, the rest of the goats is going to follow. When we added goats to our farm, we really had to kind of rethink a lot of fencing and make sure it is goat proof, because we kind of joke that goats are like fencing water. If there's a way for it to get through, it's going to try it. Cattle and goats aren't for you, consider rabbits. Rabbits are also a really sustainable species of livestock. Their manure does great in gardens, and they can really provide a consistent, steady source of meat with very little input. And so that's a shameless plug for that book. And then again, another shameless plug for our new book, Homestead Cows, which is just out. If anyone would like to contact us to follow up on anything, or you have questions that I didn't answer, please feel free to contact us at any of the above places. And with that, I will just kind of leave it if there are any questions. And thank you all. And I'm sorry I didn't let my husband get a word in edgewise. I made him stay here with me and didn't let him talk at all.
In a lot of cases, that's what husbands are for, Colleen.
Yep, that's it. Moral support and chores, he says.
Yeah.
So if there's any last minute questions, feel free to get them into the chat. We'll wait a couple minutes to see if any come in. And if not, Colleen, thank you so much. I know we're all really grateful for the presentation. I know I learned a bunch.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So we really appreciate it. Oh, Susan asked if you could put the contact information slide back up for a second.
Sure can. There we go.
Awesome.
And I'm not the greatest speaker, but I genuinely love talking to people and answering questions. So if there's anything we can do to help anybody, we love to play devil's advocate. So contact us.
All right. So it doesn't look like any more questions are coming in. Again, really appreciate it. Can't make this thing happen without wonderful speakers like you. So
Thank you.
Seriously. All right.
Yes, from all of us to both of you, we thank you very much. It's always appreciated when you guys show up, and I look for some more adventures. And if you all ever have the opportunity to spend some time with Colleen and Eric, please do. And this is just a primer of what she knows. So
thank you.
Thank you.
And thank everybody who was here. I'm sorry I wasn't able to see you all and make eye contact with you, but appreciate you being here.